That's great. I actually met Chris at the Greenbelt Festival in 2011. I think we met, and we've been friends ever since. That's true, isn't it?
Yeah. Yes, we have.
Excellent. Just want verification. And we actually wrote a booklet together, and it's available afterwards. It's great value. So if you're interested in buying it, and a lot of what Chris will share, a lot of it in more detail is here. But it's been a great thing for me to meet Chris, and we've done a lot of talks together and a lot of stuff together. So it's been a really good journey. But Chris, I'm just gonna not say much. I'm gonna ask a few questions. But Chris, do you want to say back in 2005, you weren't in a good way, were you?
No, in 2005. I walked into a petrol station and poured petrol over myself with the intentions of setting myself alight. Why? I'd had enough of life. I'd been surviving in a world that many of you see on the streets today as you walk along. This world is filled with loneliness. It was filled with anger. It was filled with dehumanization. I felt like nothing. I was totally lost inside. I'd lost all my spirituality. I'd lost my self-worth. I'd just lost the reason to live. That world of rough sleeping, I'd lived it for 3 years, and it had finally taken its toll. As you can see, I didn't actually carry the action out. I was jumped on by the police and taken to a mental institute where I spent 3 months sitting alone, thinking about my actions, thinking about my family. You see, I was an addict, and people say that's what took me to the streets, was my addiction to drugs and alcohol. This addiction doesn't just happen, it happens over a course of years and years. And through that addiction, I'd lost everything: my wife, my children, the job, and the street was my only refuge. And so that's where I ended up.
Yeah. And so you were in that mental hospital for 3 months.
Yeah.
And then you were given a flat. What was the journey from there?
People think that giving someone homeless, giving them a flat, it's the end of their homelessness. It's not quite true. My homelessness was within, as well as being physical. Just the emotion, the spirituality that had been drained from me from a child, because, like the person said there, I'd come from quite an abusive childhood, and I'd carried that on all through my life. I got my flat. And basically all that done was gave me a shelter to drink in. When I come out of the mental institute, I didn't have a clue how to be a member of society. 3 years on the streets, that had taken all that away. Sitting in a mental institute with no one talking to me about what was going on highlighted even more that homelessness within me. I came out, all I had was a blanket, some clothes that I'd worn, that I'd been given in the hospital because mine had been drenched with petrol and then thrown away. And I'd stolen 6 candles because I had no gas or electric. And so I sat in this flat all on my own. I had no friends. I'd been isolated from my friends because I'd been moved into an area that I didn't really know. And so there I was with the candles and the blankets. I went to places to try and find help, but I couldn't explain myself. It wasn't the people, it wasn't their fault they couldn't help me. It was me. I just didn't have a clue how to speak to people. And so I ended up going to the people that I could speak with, and they were the addicts that was on the streets where I was living. And so they was back into that field or into that world of addiction, drugs, and homelessness again. And so really, the flat was just something where I could bring these people back to and scrounge off them, because that's what that world was like. we'd all use one another. It's an abusive world. And we carried on abusing one another in my flat. And yeah, that carried on for a long while.
So you were, after 3 years, you were off the streets, but you were in accommodation, but in some ways your lifestyle wasn't that much different.
It was no different at all, really. All I had was a roof over my head. And that way I could invite people back and say to them, well, you supply the drink and I'll supply a bit of shelter. And that's how that world is. We use one another.
Okay, so and at that point you had a sort of connection with the church, didn't you? And what was that all about?
Well, because I had nothing, someone had gone and told the church that they'd seen this person move in and they had nothing at all. And then one day there was a knock on the door and there was a guy from the church, and straight away my head's thinking, God squad, they're going to save me. I don't want this, I don't want to be saved. Because my relationship with God while I was on the street was a very angry one. Because I was angry inside, and everyone else that I blamed, he was the last person I could blame for putting me there. It wasn't my fault. It wasn't my fault at all that I was a drug addict, that I was an alcoholic, that I was abusive, that I didn't care about anyone else but myself. I lived in this poor little world of poor me syndrome, and everyone else was just horrible. And that's what God was to me. And so this guy knocks on the door, and I tried to push him away, but he kept coming back and coming back. And he would bring me tins of food, and he'd sit among the squalor, the cans. I had no settee, nothing, and he'd sit there and talk about God. And I used to just think, why can't he go so I can go and get a drink? But he carried on bringing me food up. He didn't realise that I didn't have a cooker to cook this food on, but he still kept bringing me food. And then the day come when he said, why don't you come to church? And I made my excuses about not going. And then one morning I woke up really, really drunk, carried on drinking, and I went to church. And I was horrible. I sat there slashing about, putting my feet up, wasn't listening. And these people were so kind. They come and spoke to me, this horrible thing that stunk, that smelt of drink, that was in shabby clothes. These people still come and spoke to me. And they carried on speaking to me, and I went back. But I was always drunk when I went to church. It didn't matter what I was like, because I didn't really care about these people. And then one day this little old lady, she come up to me and she said to me, you stink. And I looked at her. I didn't know what to say. She was about this big, Doris. And she said, you make me sick, you do. You come in here, you're abusive, you smell, you're shabby, you could do with a bath, you could clean yourself up. She said, I don't like you at all. And I thought, my God, this woman's so powerful. She's told me the truth. She's actually told me what I needed to hear. She told me what I was. She was the only one to have the courage to come and tell me about who I really was. Everyone else was being so nice and kind and baking me cakes. Yeah, I accepted all that, But this little old lady actually told me the truth. Amazing lady.
How did you respond? I mean, you're saying she's amazing now. How did you respond at the time?
Well, there was a few words, unchosen words, but she was actually...
We're a very inclusive church. You can use whatever words.
Looking back on it, she was actually the start of my recovery, because she'd actually told me the truth. And the next week I went to church. I thought, I'm going to get one up on this old bird. I'm going to have a bath before I go to church. And even though I bathed in cold water that day, I still bathed. And I didn't have a drink before I went to church. I was shaking, and that was fear of seeing her again, but it was also like because I didn't have a drink. But I was shaking and everything. But I thought, no, I'm going through with it. And she come up to me, she went, you look a bit better. And that was all she said. I thought, right, next day I'm going to have a hot bath and wash my hair. And I did, and I carried on going to church every Sunday, because I knew that for 2 hours throughout the week, 2 hours I was going to be sober. So her truth got me on the road to recovery.
And Chris, what have the last sort of few years then been like since that, you know, that journey of recovery? You know, obviously, as I said, it was sort of 5 or 6 years after that we first met, and you were at Greenbelt with a group from that church. So what have the last few years been like?
When I said I'm an addict, I've actually been clean for 11 years now. Offered the alcohol at about 12 years, offered the drugs. So that's journey. It's taken quite a while. While I was living in this flat, I became very ill. I went down to 6 stone. I was bleeding from every organ, and I was given 4 days left to live. Luckily, I didn't die, got through it, but it made me get off the booze, which is one of the hardest things. It was more harder getting off the booze than the drugs. The booze just had this hold on me, just couldn't let it go. And so when I got sober, I came out of hospital and I had to learn to read, write, walk, talk, do everything again. I was like a baby. And so for the past 11 years, my life's been taken up with learning to do that. It took me 2 years to actually learn to read and write again. And so I wanted to give something back. So I started doing stuff with homeless people, met Jon. That was a bad move, but no. But I was still hurting inside, and I couldn't understand why. And I was lucky enough to be diagnosed with a thing called borderline personality. And I say I was lucky enough because I went into a therapy program. And that therapy program was 3 days a week for a whole year. And that was one of the hardest things I've ever done. Because what I had to do, I had to dig deep within me and look at the emotions that I've been blocking and been drinking and using my drugs on. I had to look at them emotions and bring them all up in front of all people and talk about them. It wasn't just about the things that had been done to me as a child or the things that I'd gone through as a child, but it was also about the things that I'd done to other people. And they was nasty things, horrible things. But that's where that world of addiction had taken me. And so for a year I spent in that therapy, it was more harder than being on the streets because it was all about me. It was about all them emotions and them feelings that I'd blocked away. And that's a scary, scary place. The streets are physically scary, but emotionally and spiritually, that program I'd done for that year, I wouldn't like to go through that again. That keeps me sober, knowing what I've done and being honest with myself about what I've done and what's happened to me. That keeps me sober today.
So that journey of confronting all of the pain and the trauma, all the things that you've experienced in your childhood, actually more difficult than being on the streets?
Yeah, definitely. The physical effects of living on the street are obviously hard, but that's what keeps a lot of people, and that's what kept me on the street, was not facing my emotions, my fears, my anger, the frustration in me, all them emotions that come up that we all tend to just push down, or we're afraid to admit that, you know, I'm angry, that I'm a horrible person, you know. I don't want to be a horrible person. I always want to be a nice person. Well, I'm not. And yeah, all them emotions, that was hard.
Say a little bit about, you mentioned spirituality a few times. Do you want to talk a little bit about, you know, the spiritual side of this, you know, especially this, you went on a pilgrimage, didn't you, recently?
Yeah, kind of my relationship with God has been sort of like up and down, and quite recently I picked up a book called The Pilgrimage by Pablo Calero, and something inside said to me, don't read this book, go and do this journey. And I'd never heard of this pilgrimage called the Camino de Santiago. And what it is a pilgrimage through France into Spain, or from Portugal into Spain to the resting place of St. James in Santiago. And so I went off with a rucksack, and it's quite symbolic really about doing a pilgrimage and being homeless, because what I carried on my back was what I needed in life. You know, forget the material things, I just needed some clothes to keep me warm and keep me dry. And it was just me going off on this journey. And so I went off and done this pilgrimage, and I was very scared, and it was okay to be scared. For the first time in my life, I could sit and talk to someone and say, do you know what, I'm really scared about this journey. You know, the homelessness, I was never ever scared. Or I was, but I would never ever say it. But this journey made me scared. I got lost. I cried when I got lost. I didn't cry on the street, and yet that day I got lost, I cried. It was okay to cry and to put my hands up and say, please help me. You know, I want someone to come and help me find my way. I didn't do that on the street. I was just filled with anger and rage at this position that I'd been put in by God. And so I'd done this pilgrimage, and I think it was about 520 miles I walked. And I'd recommend it to anyone. Just go and do this pilgrimage, because you'll find something inside you. It might not be God, but you'll find something inside that gives you strength to face anything in life.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Chris. If you want to know more, as I said, about Chris's journey, do grab this, do speak with him afterwards. I just want to say it's been learned a lot of work, obviously, but I've learned a huge amount from listening and walking with Chris over the last few years, so let's give him a big round of applause.
Thank you.